late this morning, but it's nice to see everyone. Good to have you here if you're joining us online. My name is Karen Craigo, and I'm a poet. I was Poet Laureate of Missouri from 2019 to 2021, and I'm always preaching the gospel of poetry. So today I'm going to talk about poetry, and specifically poetry as prayer. That's my topic for the day, because I know we've got some poets in the room. I'm looking at you, Dawn, but like this poetry process taps into something pretty deep, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Yeah. Dawn says I'm right. So, all right.
And I've read his poems, so I agree with you.
Yes, his poems are beautiful. So, and we'll be talking a whole lot about, hopefully we'll all discuss together. We've got a mic in the center of the room that we can pass around. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. First lines of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. I like that because I'm a word person as a poet. I love words. I find all the meaning in words. It's funny because if you ever listen to Abraham Hicks, what do they say about words? Words don't
teach.
Words don't teach. And I always just recoil a little. I'm like, words are beautiful. They're my everything, but they're right. You got to live it to understand it. Sometimes the words that we express in poetry remind people of their own lived experience too. So there's a teaching that happens through that reminder. So in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Word in this context comes from I hear that running water too. It's like, is there a leak? The word in this context comes from the Greek logos, and we recognize that word as being related to logic. In an argument, if somebody lacks logic, then their argument is not whole, but there's a chink in it, and you can always win the argument if you get in there and exploit their weakness, because if they have too many holes in their argument. But logos, in the beginning was the Word, logos, logic. That means that the Word that was with God, the Word that was God, was wholeness and logic. And it made sense. It was perfect truth that there weren't any chinks in that armor. There's like just perfect wholeness. So I focus on this word, because words are so important to me, and I try to, in all of my poems, arrive at that same wholeness. There's a certain illogic to the way the gospel is sometimes taught, right? Here we have a God who's omniscient, knows everything, omnipotent, can do anything. Yet when we err, whom he made, when we make a mistake, we have to go to him on our knees begging for forgiveness, according to the way some people teach this gospel message. And I'm kind of glad we don't do that here. Because that's not logical, right? I like that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God's logical and whole. I like that. So we see ourselves here as perfect reflections of God, and that's logical. That makes sense to me. And so I'm always striving in our kind of broken world. I'm always striving for logic and wholeness, and I'm the first to admit I take kind of an intellectual approach. Brenda and I wrote in together today, and we were kind of laughing about the idea of these college types of thinkers who come and they kind of lack heart and they speak fully from the brain. But I kind of am a brain girl. I'm not saying I'm like a genius. I'm saying that I process up here, and I always have to try to get down here in the heart. And poetry kind of combines the two. We have this connection to God, and we have this like blood that goes through our body, and I don't know, just that if there were any sort of hole in us, then it doesn't seem like we could hold this whole thing together. So, my poetry process, I kind of wanted to share with you. And I'm going to read you a poem of mine. It's called The Poet, Winnows, and Sorts. And you'll hear in this poem mention of some ancient grains, like millet and amaranth, and also some gems, like nephrite and amber, right? So that's all a metaphor for the poetic process, and we're going to talk about that in a second. The poet winnows and sorts. When I have been too long away, I begin not with words, but a series of loops on the page, a little line of hash marks, a scribble. I don't believe the poems leave us. They're always at hand, though sometimes they struggle to ease through. Here's the metaphor I talked about. Imagine you have a purse, more like a pouch, really, a bit of hide drawn with a cord, and say it's full of millet, amaranth, some other ancient grain, but also a single gem of no great worth, amber or nephrite, unexpected there among the kernels, nothing you'd welcome in your pottage, but lovely to find in the pouring, something special to turn in your palm, see how it catches the light. So the metaphor that my poetry is like a leather pouch full of ancient grain, like millet. It's ancient because these received truths that we get are likewise ancient. And the wisdom I'm trying to draw on, and any writer's kind of trying to draw it, is ancient. And in this useful thing, this millet that you pour for your morning pottage, I called it in here, out drops a gemstone. Well, it's kind of exciting to find a gem. Anytime you turn up a hidden gem, that's sort of, it's a treasure, and it's unexpected, and it seems like a gift. And these particular gems I mentioned have healing powers. So there's this gem of healing that I find in the ancient truth, right? But you wouldn't want to eat it. You'd chip a tooth on it if it did end up in your porridge. And so I'm just kind of exploring that sort of truth that finds us sometimes inconveniently, but it's a gift, and it has beauty, and you kind of need to figure it out sometimes. So that's but the poem I just read starts with my process, and I wanted to share that with you a little. When I write a poem, sometimes I can't even think of a way in. So I draw pictures, and I just move my pen, and I scribble, and I'm all over the place with that. And sometimes I do attempt a few words, and then I'm embarrassed by how bad they are. So I just scratch them out, because I'm a little bit crazy, I think. But then finally I get to the start that feels like a start. And after all the false starts and all the pen movements that weren't going anywhere, I'm off. Dawn, I got to ask you, and I got to put the mic on you, because I think people might want to hear your, oh, thank you. Elby's helping.
It's on?
Yeah, it's on. I want to hear, Dawn, your process for writing. How do you start a poem? This is Don Frederick, our resident poet. I think he's the poet laureate of Unity of Springfield.
Well, for me, it comes unexpectedly, usually in reverie, just before I wake up in the morning. Anytime between 3 and 6, I'll have an idea, and I'll scribble it down, or get up and at least put the idea onto the computer so that it doesn't escape, because it will, just like a dream. Mm-hmm. It'll escape.
Yeah.
Then I just never know where it's going. I think I know where it's going, but not usually.
Yeah.
Usually it takes a life of its own.
Yeah.
And usually I take a metaphysical approach to it.
Yeah.
And try to get as deep as I can.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, hard to describe anything that is happening there because
Yeah.
it's all so subjective. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's so true, and I think that would be true of any art, right? Any painters probably experience the same thing. Yeah,
Yes.
Wendy has a thought.
Well, I just wanted to add this for those who don't know. Don was a scientist. His career was science, all of that. And after he's had 2 wives before that he loved dearly and who died of different things. And when he was almost 70 and the second wife passed, he actually prayed for a reason to stay active in life and stay here. And he had never really read poetry nor done any poetry. And the reason in the dreams is he started getting poems full-blown in the dreams.
Oh,
and it was literally a gift from as answer to prayer.
That's wonderful. What Don said, and we need to rehash the highlights here. He wakes from dreaming. That's the best time sometimes to meditate, isn't it? Because there's nothing standing in your way of being able to be like empty and waiting to be filled. But writing a poem is a type of meditation too, really, or writing anything. So he's got all the dream knowledge in him, right? All night long you dream, you go into the REM phase of sleep, questions that you had in the day are worked out, problems are worked out, questions are answered. Yet still we kind of wake and we don't have the day-to-day difficulties, right? We don't have to brew the coffee. We don't have to answer our email. We are open to the mystery from the night before. And so Don goes in that mystery dream state, and he immediately writes something down because like a dream, it will dissipate. You will lose it. If you don't grab it out of the sky, it will leave you. So what a poet does then is take that little bit of knowledge, and there's something else very interesting Don said, that he thinks he knows where it's going, but he doesn't really. And that's the sign of a real artist there. If we just went to the page with very calculated ideas about how to write something, we couldn't learn from that. All we would learn is that we're super smart and we had a good idea and we executed it. But that's not why I go to poetry, and it sounds like it's not why Don goes to poetry. We go to poetry to receive knowledge from divine source. It's a weird way to think about writing, and it's not what you're going to get in the average creative writing classroom, right? But there is knowledge to be gained from your deeper self, maybe from a muse. Maybe they're like little fluttering demigods who bring them to us. Maybe it's God, divine source, nature reflected upon in tranquility. That's what Wordsworth said poetry came from. But there's something there to hear if you're open to it. And that's what Don just described for us. An openness to receiving wisdom. Kind of born from the, you have another thought? Hold on, we're getting them on mic, everybody in computer land. All right.
What I really look for is something that is commonly beyond words, that is deeper than words, and to the place where I actually call them stone axes, words that do not capture the essence of truth, but it's the best we can offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting too? There's something ineffable, inchoate. We might say there aren't words for everything that comes from spirit. It's probably part of the reason words don't teach. But when you're a poet, you try to arrive at truth. And we use a tool for that. We use the metaphor, right? Before I move on to metaphor, I want to make a note to talk about metaphor here. I'm interested in hearing, well, poetry is how I pray. It sounds like Don can relate. Does anybody else have a way of praying that they'd be willing to share. How do you pray? Anybody else pray by writing things down? Or how do you do it? Elby, how do you pray?
Golly, I don't really think of it so much as prayer as, well, I ask the angels for a lot of help.
Yeah,
So I guess that would be prayer.
that works.
It's centering in on the source energy and releasing it to flow.
Yeah.
It was interesting because this week I was talking to somebody about wisdom, and I can remember one time asking for wisdom and feeling like I got a download. It was like I felt this energy just completely go through my body, and it was like a download, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And all through Solomon's writing, he says, ask for wisdom. And when you do, it's like you get a download, and it's amazing. And I will choose to live an easy world from a book that we read in book study here. But it's allowing that and putting yourself in that mindset where it flows.
Yeah. Yeah. Then so there's always a flow, and sort of when you pray, what I hear you describing is you just sort of reach into the flow and you can kind of pull out something that's useful. If you ask for it, it's there in the flow. And when we oh, I'm not coming through the mic. Thank you very much. But when we reach for what's out there in the flow, we can pull it down like a fish, a catch and release kind of thing. So, but it's always there and always all around us. And we just had Tom Long's celebration of life. We tend to believe that he has joined the flow and that he's part of that source of truth. He's part of divine source now. He's part of all of that. So we know that we're getting the great wisdom of someone like Tom. We can just pull it anytime we want to. Yeah, Brenda has a thought back there.
Well, with all
Put that- Go.
technological stuff that we have in our houses, like computers and cell phones and television and stuff, I find whenever I really need to pray about something, I need to get up, get out of the house, go down and walk in the woods and do kind of a walking meditation type prayer where you can get out in nature and really get in touch with your inner self and not be influenced by all the modern electronic stuff that's around us that's around me to distract me whenever I'm really need to get in touch with my spirit side.
I hear what you're saying, and to use that as a metaphor, again, this word, we have all the electronic, there's always, all around us right now, there are waves flowing with electronic information. We're all Googling things and looking at the weather, and all that stuff's all around us. It's almost like when we get into nature, we have a clearer signal from divine source, right? We don't have all the interference that we get from electronic means and other, or it doesn't even have to be electronic. We don't have our boss telling us something's due. All those sources of interference when we get alone in nature. And I mentioned Wordsworth earlier. He really believed that poetry was made by nature reflected upon in tranquility. You go out in nature and then you think. In nature or back home with nature in you, you just sort of reflect, and there's wisdom to be found. He's typical romantic. So yeah, here's Wendy.
So when I'm with other people and sociably, I will join in in the prayer process where we stop and say a prayer.
Yeah.
But it's not how I pray and not how I believe that prayer for me is. So in the 5 principles, God is, I am, I ask, I pray.
Yeah.
Praying to me is just, my life is my prayer.
Yeah.
What I'm focused on, how I'm vibrating inside is my prayer. So if I'm going to do anything active as a prayer, it's paying attention to what I'm giving my attention to.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And shifting my attention back to the world I want and the things that I want here. And then from that, I go to the 5th principle, which is I act from that connection. So it's not something, I don't pray to something.
Yeah.
I pray from a state of being.
Nice. Now, do you find yourself, Wendy, going in and out and tuning? Like you can have interruptions from TV and things like that, and you're less prayerful, but then sometimes you can be quiet, maybe meditate, maybe just sit still, and you're more tuned in, or how does that work for you?
I don't know that there's a specific place. It's just refocusing.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a, Abraham Hicks teaches that our emotions are guidance.
Yeah.
And so when I begin to go to a place inside of unrest, I recognize that I'm not moving toward the world and the life that I want to be, and I'm in the connection. So that unrest says I stop and I find a way to quiet the unrest.
Yes.
And get my thoughts back into that.
And they call it segment intending. A new segment starts and you reset. Any new segment, like
Right.
next
So
time.
that's kind of a pre-paving thing rather than a fine-tuning as you
Gotcha.
go along.
Gotcha. Okay. Now I think I saw you say something. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I feel like I did know your name. What's your name?
My name's Smokey.
Hi. You were kind of nodding along with the nature idea. Tell me about that. Nature is kind of important to you to tap into this?
Absolutely. I actually require it so I can just be a sane person.
Yeah.
But I love reveling in it, and sometimes my prayer is with the intention of working in my garden.
Yeah.
Or I get inspiration from nature to write, and then as I'm writing, and I tend to do it in a descriptive manner is my favorite way.
Yeah, so you write too. I'm so happy to hear it.
Well, I haven't in a long time, and when I saw the topic for this today, I was like, well, I better come because it's clearly a sign that I must start again. Even
You're
though
being called.
I'm being called
There's
to,
something,
so.
and I called on you just now. You have to start writing again. You knew it before you came. You got to do it.
Yes, you're certainly right about that. And but I also sing too.
Yeah.
It's not as good as writing for me,
Yeah.
but it's been like my substitute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as good.
Is it because you're singing other people's words and you have this imposed meaning, or is there something else?
No, it's just me singing in prayer.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it comes out so much more beautifully in writing for me when I'm describing nature, and then always there's something in it, like a piece of amber in a bag.
Yes.
You know, something
Yeah.
unexpected
Yeah.
comes. So anyway, I'm so glad you're doing this class.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so glad.
So glad you're here. It's nice. I just really wanted to know where my writers were. So, but there is something that happens with writing that there's sort of a back and forth, whereas other types of prayer, it seems like one-way communication sometimes. Like when you get together in a group and you're like, dear God, prayer, prayer, prayer. It's like, I can't, that's a social activity for me, but it's not really how I vibe with God. Yeah. James has a thought.
Yeah, I don't vibe with God that way either. No, I really resonate with the whole nature thing, being out in, everything is nature though. This is nature because it's natural, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
But when I'm out with, like the trees, or I'm out, in that sort of environment, and I have always, and I've done this for years, but wherever I live, because I've lived in different states, and I've always had a tree nearby my, where I live, house or apartment, that I really connect with. And what I tend to do is if I don't feel grounded, I'll go out to that tree and I'll put my bare feet on the tree.
Oh, really?
It's almost like I get really connected to the root system. And I don't even know how I get connected to the tree, but that just always grounds me and connects me to the earth and allows me to feel, stable, safe, secure, trusting of life, that sort of thing. So just wanted to show that.
Maybe in college I tried a hallucinogenic drug one time, but I went up to a tree and I put my fingers in the bark and I sort of watched and I entered the tree. My fingers became long and gnarled and barky, and I was just like, I was the tree.
I have a funny story about trees and intuition. So my husband and I were walking in the woods in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we both veered off the trail, quite a ways. Didn't say anything to each other. We both reached out and touched the exact same tree.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I heard the tree calling to me, and I felt the tree. And that was, and I use that when I teach about intuition, that there's more than one way to experience it. For him, he hears spirit.
Yeah.
For me, I feel spirit.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a cool story about a tree, too.
That is. And it's so relevant to what we're talking about because some of you online and in this room, you're not writers. So what I'm talking about with writing to pray doesn't resonate with you at all. Dan's a writer. Do you ever feel like writing is communication and prayer?
Well,
Here comes the mic.
Well, I apologize for being late. I was outside.
That's okay. He's in his yard in nature.
I've been writing for about 30 years and written books, been published, and the I Ching and Taoism and all that kind of thing. And the thing that always impressed me about writing was the words that I had never really used before came to my writing. And it's like I'd always have to say, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And it wasn't, maybe it was something I had read earlier, like my brain is a little computer and found a way to use the word that I knew but hadn't used before.
Right.
But I think that I think writing is a way of expressing who we are. If you've done it for a while, I think that's the reason why they say journaling and writing on a regular basis is so important. When I used to teach, I used to convey how reading was so critical.
Yeah.
Because the words that you read become part of what you know, and you may not ever use that word in the past, but having read it and internalized it, when you need it to express a thought or whatever, it's there.
Right.
And I think that's what reading, particularly with kids, adding the vocabulary, which is so critical, having a vocabulary that's big enough that expresses what you want to say. And that's really where most people kind of lack, you might say.
Yeah. I always experience the lack in what words can do. More words, more potential, right?
As a side, now that you've got me started, when I used to go to China all the time, I had this dear friend. He was a travel agent, but he was the English translator. Whenever I'd have a meeting with the mayor or somebody, whatever, he was always the person in the room translating what I said. And I was always amazed that I might say something that may be 15, 20, 30 words, whatever, and then he would in turn try to translate, and he would only say 5 or 6 words of what I had said.
Yeah.
How did he, because that's all the English he knew.
Yeah.
And I think that's why reading, particularly as it relates to our writing and what we say.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's important, that I think that conveys to what we do here, especially with world religions and thinking of other ways of thought, whether it's Emerson or Lhasa or whoever, that it's that understanding how others see the world and connecting to the flow.
Right.
And ultimately, that's what writing is for me.
Yeah.
Is connecting in with that universal eternal flow.
That's so great. We actually kind of hit on that right before you walked in, but in a different way. So
Yeah, because I think that's really the key. Connecting to that flow really defines who we really are.
yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, Elby's got a thought, and then we'll go to you, Wendy.
That was one of the things that came out. I was talking to this guy this week that was working for me, and he was illiterate until he went to prison and he taught himself to read. And we were talking about words, and one of the things that came to me, which this happens when I'm talking to people, I get what they seem to receive, is when you read poetry, it elevates your energy level. It changes your vibration, and it raises your energy level so that you are in a position to receive more.
Yeah.
And you get into that flow. So that's why I appreciate poetry, because it just changes your vibration.
Right.
And when you change your vibration, the things that you attract and the things that you encounter changes.
Yeah.
And it changes your world.
It's true.
It struck me quite a while ago that poetry is more intense than prose, in that, well, a good writer will probably write, I would estimate 1,000 or 2 words a day, where when I write, I'm lucky to write 200, but I pack into those 200 what could be said in 2,000 if it were
Right.
done in prose.
That's a great point.
And I think that's the attraction of it. You get more, not only more information, but you get more feeling into what is being conveyed.